For the first time in one of these videos, I have acquired something from the original theatrical release of this film. Okay, good evening everyone. My name is Celeste Lacabre. Welcome back to the channel. I feel I must apologize for my lack of output as of late and the delay on these videos in particular, but I think we are back on track for a somewhat reasonable upload schedule. This has been ready for quite some time. I just have been struggling a bit lately and have been putting off or having trouble actually shooting the video and editing it and everything like that. But after that, the November one, despite how gargantuan the release slate is there, it shouldn't be too much of a wait for that because I've already watched all the films. I just need to do the supplements and write my notes and do the video, as it were. And then, you know, hopefully I can be a little bit more caught up for January, which just arrived the other day, and then February when it does eventually arrive. Hopefully I can get myself to a pace where I'm reviewing these like less than a month after they come out, as opposed to Flight 4. But in any case, let's go ahead and get started. We're talking about the Vinegar Syndrome October subscriber releases today. There's 4 releases to talk about, but there's just an abundance of special features to go through. Like, this might have been the most, well, I don't know, like May was pretty bad, but per title, this might have been the most amount of special features watching I have done per title. If you don't know what Vinegar Syndrome is, they are a home video distributor and film archive that preserve and release underseen cult and genre films. And these are all the titles they put out in October. Before we get started, if you are at all interested in cult and art house films and are looking to get into more in-depth discussions on them, please go ahead and click the subscribe button and like the video. And go ahead and click the link in the description for my Patreon page, where you will get access to 3 exclusive videos a month, handcrafted, handwritten postcards, and more. So maybe in the interest of salaciousness or getting you to stick around for a longer period of time in the video, let's start with the maybe the wildest one in the bunch. This is Bloodsucking Freaks. This is a trauma film released by Vinegar Syndrome in 4K. See, I'll give you a tour of the package real quick. We got the cover here, and it says X, no one under 17 admitted. C, the flesh-eating cannibal women. The iron tourniquet that screws your brains. C, the strange brain surgery. The sickness that will make you retch. C, the living dartboard. The orgy of the screaming virgins. The incredible torture show. Now that might sound like it's overly salacious, or that it might be advertising something it can't live up to. However, that's not the case, as we'll get into shortly. You have your reversible cover art here, and the special features. There's a 2-disc set, 1 Blu-ray and 1 4K. And then what was fun and special about this, I hope this is the last time I have to do this, is that it is a reversible slipcover. So it actually has a magnet clasp. You can undo it, and then I'm not going to do it because I don't want to bend it again, but you have a rather infamous scene on the reversible art, which you can then twist around and reclasp. And then you have yourself a reversible slipcover. So that's fun. It is a more sturdy and solid, it's thicker, it's got more weight to it. It'll take up more room on the shelf, but it's a fun idea and it's cool artwork, so I'm a fan of it. So to go ahead and discuss the film, Bloodsucking Freaks, the film kind of is about a showman slash slaver named Sardu, who creates a kind of extreme torture show in New York City that is like open to the public because on its face it's supposed to be just like a really extreme kind of like thing that is done for entertainment but is ultimately fake. Like, he will tell you that these are, or like the idea is that these are just actors playing being killed, but in actuality he really is torturing and killing these people for real on the stage. And at one of the screenings, a sort of snooty art critic tells him that he thinks that the whole thing is trash, it's basically garbage, it's meritless, it's not real art, and this ends up having some dire consequences. It reminds me a lot of something like Theater of Blood from Vincent Price, about the Shakespearean actor who kind of goes nuts on his critics. Let's see, this film is pretty notorious for how obscenely violent it is, but also how much like nudity and depravity and just general horrificness is on display. The amount of nudity in this is such that it could almost qualify as like a softcore porn at some part. This would have to be a direct-to-streaming or direct-to-video release today. Like, there's no way you could get away with this in a theater. Like, this is a hard NC-17 for sure. The film is also accused quite consistently of being like extremely misogynistic, and I didn't think that that was fair after I watched the film, but after watching interviews with the director, I think that that is more fair. The dude seems to be kind of like a slimy slimeball piece of shit, honestly. He kind of just strikes me as a guy who sucks. And, you know, the film definitely tries its best to show as much graphic female nudity as possible for as much of the runtime as possible. But again, like I always say with these films that feature extensive scenes of violence against women, like I don't think that the people inflicting all this violence are necessarily supposed to be our heroes or our good guys, or that we're supposed to look at this and feel like excited about the horrors going on. I mean, it's always a bit problematic when you then combine that with scenes that are strictly for titillation. Like, there's a lot of scenes in here that are just strictly bondage, and then it's just a naked woman for some time until there's violence involved. Like, that's, like, I'm not stupid. That's clearly the intention here, and it is problematic to some degree. But I think that there are interesting ideas here despite that. In particular, I think that the film has a lot of interesting things to say about the nature of extreme violence in entertainment in and of itself. There's a scene where Sardou kind of monologues at the critic, and it's clear that he's like, this is like a writer or director's insert talking directly to the audience. He basically says something to the effect of like, look, nobody likes horrible violence, but if you put a veneer of entertainment around it, if you add nudity to it, if you put the slightest spin on it that convinces people that they're watching art, then they suddenly love it. And like kind of explicitly asking the question, where do you draw the line between like enjoying violence for entertainment versus just enjoying violence in real life? Like, what does that say about us as an audience, and what does that say about the filmmakers themselves? It's kind of a heady idea, and like something that I would not have thought to give something like this credit for, but it felt extremely overt as I was watching it. Again, more examples of like meta horror that don't get the credit that Scream gets, right? You know, like this stage, this theater of the macabre is kind of like the stand-in for the cinema itself, or like the movie screen, or just general entertainment, you know, broadly speaking. It's also fun to me that the cop in this is like just a complete dirtball piece of shit, like scuzzy, corrupt fucking dickhead. You know, we love honest portrayals of the police, right? Just one last note on the film itself. I guess I have to express my admiration and my love for Ralphus, the dwarf character. He, you know, maybe this is where we start getting into like Terrifier territory, where it's clear that we are supposed to like the villains of the story a little bit too much, where he's just like so clearly charming and like a joy to watch as he does the most horrific shit. I just love him so much. And also, like, an interesting thing to note is that him and Sardou are in like a kind of sadomasochistic like gay relationship where Ralphus is the top. It's not something I would have expected at all, and it is pretty fascinating and fairly subversive, I think. So overall, I gave the film a 7 out of 10. I definitely like highly recommend it if you're into like extreme cinema, or you're into sleazy cult films. I don't know that this is going to convert anybody who's not into that, but it could be fun to kind of gauge someone's reaction based on something like this. I think it's pretty arguable that this has very little redeeming value, and like you might lose some friends showing it to them, but you know, do what you will, I suppose. So in terms of special features, there are a lot. The first one is a featurette about the Traumathon 2023 screening, which is, I guess, like some kind of trauma type festival where the film was screened. It's a really interesting interview with Lloyd Kaufman is really what it is. But it takes place at this festival. He talks about how Joel Reed was just straight up a shitty person. That's the director. And he like screwed over his investors and tried to steal the rights to the film back. He was also involved in a violent groping incident that got him arrested. These are the sort of details that make me reticent to defend the film and its violent misogyny. Lloyd Kaufman calls him quote-unquote disgusting, and he says that they wouldn't distribute today due to the misogyny. He actually says this is the only film in their entire catalog that if they had the opportunity to, if they were offered the film to distribute today, they would say no. He also tells a story about how there was a famous theater that hired fake feminist protesters to protest the film at its first screening, which then inadvertently attracted real anti-porn protesters, and they threatened the theater with going to the Board of Health, and they actually pulled the film as a result. So, you know, I guess be careful with your marketing stunts, playing with fire like that. There's a live commentary from a 2009 screening with the director, and a Q&A with the director from a screening. Pass, just fully pass. I started watching this, the video and the audio was horrible, and this guy fucking sucks, so pass. There's then a quote-unquote random hotel interview with the director. It kind of opens with a fake phone call. He's just like, oh, sorry. Let me pick up the phone real quick. No, woman with large breasts, I will not let you give me a blowjob. I'm doing an interview right now, you dumb bitch. Sorry, I had to take that. Just like this fucking gross macho bullshit. I fucking hate this guy. I gotta be so honest. He's the fucking worst. So pass. There's then another archival introduction from Lloyd Kaufman where he kind of reiterates that out of over 1,000 films that they've distributed, it's the only one that they would pass on today. He compares it with A Clockwork Orange and saying that it's one of a rare bunch of films that actually gets more extreme as time goes on. There's an archival cast and crew interview segment. It's actually conducted by Eli Roth, and it's actually kind of cute. He's just kind of like fanboying, asking people questions and stuff. There's also an archival interview with Eli Roth, which is just excellent. He talks about his love of the film, the process of doing the initial commentary that he did for it, his analysis of the film, why he loves it and why he thinks it works. He talks about accidentally ripping it off for Hostel, which is fair. It's also an interview that's clearly of its time because he's like talking about Green Inferno, like trying to hype it up for its release and talking about his like horror website Crypt. There's also another archival interview with Chris Jericho, which is, I think, a must-see. It's like really fucking hilarious. He talks about how he came across this movie in what he and his friends called the cheap-ass movie club, where they would essentially go to like gas stations or trashy video stores or whatever and try to find like the cheapest, most awful film they could find. And they would grade it based on like how gratuitous the nudity is, how bad the effects are, how violent it got, how bad the acting is, things like that. And they said that this was far and away like the most out there and like highest graded film that they watched out of all of them. Like this is the definitive cheap ass movie club film. He also talks about, wrestling fans will know more about this than I do. I'm just going to briefly touch on it so I don't get anything wrong, but he essentially had like a bodyguard character that he named after Ralphus, and then Ralphus got famous on his own and had no idea what the reference was to or anything like that. I thought that was fun. There's also a new commentary with, I'm going to do my best to pronounce this right, John Sputzner? Spooner? Spunner? I'm so sorry, John. That's my bad. Author of Bloodsucking Freak, The Life and Films of the Incredible Joel M. Reed. So this is a super informative and highly watchable commentary. My only problem is after seeing how much this guy sucks, it was a little uncomfortable watching just how biased the commentary was because of his like clear and obvious, I mean, he wrote a book about him, fascination with the director and also personal friendship with the director. But you know, if you want like an academic, like behind the scenes sort of knowledge-filled commentary, that's going to be the one. There's also an archival commentary with Eli Roth. This is interesting because he got this job before he was established as a filmmaker. He was just going to film school and he knew somebody who knew the director, and the director refused to do the commentary because he again was trying to like steal the rights back, so he didn't want to be involved with the DVD release. So Eli Roth, as like a huge fan of this film, like this is one of his favorite films, kind of just ended up with the job by knowing somebody. And he's talking about how he like called Joel like the night before he was supposed to record. He was like, all right bro, like I know you don't want to do this commentary, but I want to make it good. What can you tell me about making this movie? And apparently he was very like gracious with the anecdotes and talking about like his ideas for the film and how he made the film and everything like that. But the commentary is really funny and it's really entertaining. There's some parts where he maybe gives it more credit than I think it's due. What's the film? Fuck. Because I dropped the ball and took so long to record this, I'm actually forgetting which film he compares it to or says stole this idea. I think it's Taxi Driver or something like that. He names a huge film and is like, you know, did they steal this from Bloodsucking Freaks? Who knows? This is kind of funny listening to that. All right, and that's Bloodsucking Freaks. If you're a fan of the film, like that's a no-brainer. If you're a fan of really out there, sleazy, questionable films, that's kind of a no-brainer. But if any of that sounded like it was too much, or you are particularly sensitive to violence against women or things like that, definitely stay away. I will say, as usual, I thought the 4K looked great, by the way, so there's that to consider. Right, next up on the docket, we have Rabid Grannies, with the return of the lenticular slipcover, which actually does the same thing on the front and the back. This is again a bit of a chunkier slipcover because of the lenticularness of it. And then you have your reversible art, special features on the back, and I'm not going to open it because it's just a single disc. Okay, so Rabid Grannies. This is the first of the stack that I watched, and I watched it literally months ago at this point, so I'm going to do my best. But this film is not great. Let's just say that off the jump. It takes, and again, this was all reinforced when I watched all the special features because like the producer and I think maybe the writer, maybe the editor, there were a few people involved that were like, look, straight up, this film takes too long to get going. It just does. Like, there's almost an hour before anything substantially horrific happens. So it's very slow for the first bit. And to be clear, when it delivers, it delivers. Like if you picked up a film called Rabid Grannies, I don't think, and you were expecting something, I don't know that you could reasonably say that it does not fulfill those expectations, but there is a lot of setup to get there. The dubbing is also particularly horrible. It may be the worst I've ever seen, or like the most awkward at least. And it was explained in the special features in a way that I think made sense. A lot of these people were speaking English that didn't actually speak English. Not even that it wasn't their first language, they just straight up did not speak it, and they were just kind of sounding out their lines and kind of miming it. And of course this creates a very unnatural flow of dialogue, very stilted and slow speaking performances, and then the poor dubbing artist had to kind of work with that and do their best, and it just creates a very strange viewing experience. So there's those problems. And then just another thing real quick, there's a quote-unquote lesbian character, or just two I guess, that I think are both treated pretty poorly, and let's just say the social politics there have not aged particularly well. But with those negatives aside, I gotta say, like, when this thing gets going, it fucking rips. And honestly, even before then, it is still pretty amusing and pretty funny and pretty entertaining. But man, like, the special effects in this are just something else. This is like horror comedy that does not hold back on like the violence or the gags or like the jokes, and it's also like kind of mean. Like, there's some pretty brutal parts in this that are played for laughs. You know, I made this observation like right when the film was done, and then I kept seeing it afterwards, reading about it, watching stuff about it. This film is a lot like Dead Alive. It has a very similar kind of feel and vibe, and I haven't seen Dead Alive in a long time, so I don't think the plot mechanics necessarily are that similar, but you have like a very iconic like kind of dinner table sequence that sort of kicks off. It's sort of the inciting incident for all the mayhem that is to follow. And you just have really, really gross practical effects and a lot of blood. And also the kind of horror comedy tone to it. Yeah, that would be my closest point of reference, I think, for the kind of thing to expect, is to see if you might like this. Overall, this was another 7 out of 10 for me. Like, definitely some problems, but I had a blast with it, and I would definitely watch it again. This is a pretty good, like, watch with people type thing, or if you're just a weird freak like me, you'd probably enjoy watching it by yourself too. So moving on to the special features, there's a great interview with the producer. Jesus Christ, I don't know if I should try to pronounce this. Johan van der Waschenip. Sorry. I pulled a lot of the information that I just relayed from this interview. It's really, really good and really informative. Yeah, he says that the first 50 minutes are just too slow, like, full stop. Like, he thinks that they should have been trimmed down a bit, or maybe the script should have been rewritten a bit. But he actually says he has a script written for a sequel, and he is actively trying to make Rabid Grannies 2 a thing. So, I guess perhaps with some amount of trepidation, there is that. There's also an interview with the editor, Philippe Ravoet. Just continually embarrassing myself. He discusses how he achieved the rhythm of the film with what little he had to work with, because there just wasn't any dialogue, or what was there was completely unintelligible, just because of the nature of the dubbing. Also, like, the film was produced so cheaply and on so little film stock that there really wasn't a lot of like extra coverage or second takes or anything like that. Like, if you had a bad shot, you kind of just had to work with it if you wanted the continuity to remain. And so he had to find like creative ways to like make that happen and make the film still watchable and keep the continuity intact. Oh, there was also a really good little tidbit of like editing advice on how he would prolongate like the big special effects sequences, because he talked about how like, oh, we have this great shot of like the arm extending all across the dinner table, but it's literally like 2 seconds. But the way he achieved making it feel like it was on the screen longer is he would do a lot of intercuts within that shot. So it would cut back to people's reactions, it would cut back to the old lady actually doing the hand motion, and so that way you see the special effect like 4 or 5 times, and it's stretched over like 10 seconds as opposed to like 2. And so your brain thinks that you got to see like this really long extended special effect when it was actually quite brief. He also talks about how he showed the film to his kids and they didn't like it. So that's a rip. There's another interview with Trauma president Lloyd Kaufman. He mostly rants about the MPAA and how Trauma would actually go ahead and cut the scenes to their specifications and then just screen them uncensored anyway. He says that they only got caught doing this one time because a mom took her very young child to see Bloodsucking Freaks and then complained. which I suppose is understandable, but also, like, bro, why are you taking your kid to see that, you know? I admire the audacity there to just say fuck you and do it anyway, and like just say I dare you to like catch me doing this, because you're not actually gonna watch these fucking weirdo movies that we make. Because fuck the MPAA, fucking Christian conservative, hand-wringing, pearl-clutching, homophobic garbage. We don't like the MPAA around here, so I support that fully. I feel like now that wouldn't fly though. Like somebody would have that shit up on Twitter like immediately, you know? Just like, how did they get away with just people, just like film Twitter is like posting little videos of just like, how the hell did this rated R movie get away with like a fully nude scene sucking a brain through a straw, and then they'd get in trouble for that. There's also there's like a feature-length documentary. It's like an hour and 40 minutes or something like that. It's called Forgotten Scares, an in-depth look at Flemish horror cinema. It's a pretty decent overview of this really underseen, like, Flemish horror scene. It gives you a pretty decent look at some highly obscure films. Like, I added quite a few films to my watch list, like, looking at this, or watching this, but, like, you can't find most of them, which is unfortunate. I gotta say, like, the documentary definitely feels like kind of a fancier YouTube video, but, like, you know, this is very independent, like DIY stuff, and you know, they got interviews with all the major players in the films that they're talking about. So it's an impressively put together doc, and I recommend seeing it for sure. There's an archival making of documentary, some really good behind the scenes footage, just kind of showing the mechanics of a lot of the special effects. This is also where I learned that the actors had to learn their lines phonetically, and at least many of them did, so that results in a uneven final product, we should say. There's an 88-minute cut sourced from tape with commentary by the director. I don't know, I didn't get much out of this that I didn't already know. Like, honestly, I thought the producer had a lot more interesting things to say than the director, but it's there for posterity and if you want a director's commentary. And that's it. That's basically everything I think I want to say about Rabid Grannies. Definitely, I don't know, if you're a fan of like the Evil Dead films, if you're a fan of Dead Alive, if you're a fan of, I don't know, some of those like more out there, like really gory, really goofy zombie movies, that kind of thing. Horror comedy in general, if that's your jam, I think this is a pretty solid entry into that sort of milieu, and maybe you might find a new favorite, you know what I mean? So that one gets my recommendation as well. Okay, next let's talk about Mother's Day. There's your slipcover. There's your reversible art, which I enjoy. Special features and stuff. 2-disc set. 4K and Blu-ray. So right off the jump, I gotta say that this disc might be the most amount of special features I've ever seen on a single disc release. I must confess to you, dear viewer, I saw the list of special features and then I saw there was a page 2 and I almost just decided, no, I'm done. I'm not doing this anymore. This is too much. But your humble narrator persevered, and here we are. So let's get into it. So Mother's Day is essentially a film about it's a Hicksploitation thing. We got like this like backwards bumpkin family that live in like a rundown shack of a house, and it's 2 brothers and their mother, and they essentially just lure people back there and, I mean, just rape and kill them. Like, that's the whole thing. They do it specifically because of their mother, or on the orders of their mother, for entertainment purposes. So it's a rather dysfunctional family, I guess you could say. Definitely kind of like a Texas Chainsaw vibe, except way sleazier, but maybe not as grimy? I don't know. That's kind of the point of comparison I'm going to reach for here, where you kind of have this family just living this entirely antisocial life, like outside of society entirely, and, you know, people end up in that house and they don't leave, that kind of thing, you know? The 4K, I gotta say, looks, like, outstanding. It looks immaculate. It looks beautiful. Just one of the better restorations I saw all year. And in terms of the film, like, I gotta be, like, let's be honest about it, it's a tough watch. Like, I would put this in the, I guess, like, content warning ahead, and like, if you don't want any amount of spoilers, maybe skip this, because I think just saying the name of this genre is in of itself kind of a spoiler. But like, I would put this firmly in the rape and revenge genre, and you know, it's pretty rough. Like, there are scenes in this that are wildly uncomfortable, very disturbing, and like not fun at all. But then it also has a lot of scenes that are a lot of fun, that are very tongue-in-cheek and very, like, clearly comedic and also work. And then there's like scenes that are just kind of entertaining or titillating, like, you know, these kind of things that you can come to expect in exploitation films. And so there's definitely a bit of tonal whiplash, and like, I could understand if you're having fun with it and then the rape scene happens and you're like, oh, okay, I think I'm good. Like, I think that is understandably something that could ruin the vibe. for the rest of the runtime, especially just the nature of it is so seedy and so disgusting, and like there's not really such a thing as like a not disturbing rape scene, but this one is particularly bad, I gotta say. But yeah, they get into this in the special features, and you know, maybe because this is another one of Eli Roth's favorite films, so he's all over this thing too, and maybe this is the film that he said was being ripped off. I don't remember. I'm getting my Eli Roth anecdotes mixed up, I think he makes a point that's very salient in that the film is clearly satirical. Like, it is a satire of American consumerism and American society. Like, the kids, the two brothers in this movie are like raised off of like television and product placement and consumerism, and like the entire house is just like filled with brands, you know? The TV is constantly on and plugging products to consume, and it's making a comment about American society in ways that I think are substantial and are not just window dressing to film really gross, salacious stuff, you know? Now, to be clear, it is still gross and salacious. You have plenty of that as well, but I think that there is like a brain somewhere in this film, and I don't think you even have to look that hard to find it. There's also really interesting themes about family, overbearing parental figures, and helicopter parents, and all sorts of perhaps dysfunctional family dynamics are explored here. I also think the way that the brothers kind of interpret or channel their ideas of masculinity that they've been brought up with are pretty interesting, and perhaps toxic in ways that are not as rare as people would like to think. And yeah, I think that all the girls in this movie, actually really everybody in this movie is quite good, but like the victims, like the four women who go on like this trip, I think that they're all pretty great, and they all turn in pretty bold, pretty vulnerable, and pretty solid performances. There's some really creative deaths in here too, like just real nasty shit. Yeah, overall, I think this is pretty much a winner. I think it achieves what it sets out to do, and it's one that I'll probably revisit, and I would recommend to people, again, who are comfortable with the more extreme side of this kind of horror film. I gave this one an 8 out of 10. I do really recommend it. And now to get into the cornucopia, myriad, constellation special features that we have on deck here. First, we have an interview with the actress, Nancy Hendrickson. I think it's a good interview. She talks about how she doesn't really like or understand the appeal of horror films. She did this to jumpstart her career, and it ended up mainly being a career in commercials, which she is happy about. She talks about how I think the first screening that she actually attended to see how the film played and to see the audience reaction was in a porn theater, because the film was so extreme that I guess those are the kind of places that were taking it up. And she was just kind of taken aback at how like beautiful and ornate the theater was, because she had never been in a place like that, and was actually kind of impressed by how much she appreciated the architecture, I suppose. A few people bring this up, but they did actually get a full-page ad in the New York Times with the original poster on it, which is a bold marketing technique, and it did play very well in New York City. And she also talks about how she attended the anniversary screening at the, I believe at the New Beverly, with Eli Roth and his mother in attendance because they had programmed it, and she was personally invited, and how she had a fun time with that. There's an interview with the actor Michael McCleary. It's pretty informative. He talks about how his co-star did not feel comfortable shooting the rape scene with him. He looked very uncomfortable relaying this anecdote, understandably so. I guess he gave off, like, he said at this time his approach to acting was to like really, like, he was a method actor essentially, and he was very intense about it. And I guess the idea of doing a scene that vulnerable where somebody like chooses not to break character was like not something she was interested in. And then she said that like right when they were about to shoot the scene, she said, if I'm gonna do this, you have to use a different actor, and you have to give me $500 right now. And they did it. And he just kind of was like, you know what, I respected that. Set your boundaries and get the bag, you know? There's also an interview with the co-writer Warren Late. It's really just like one of the best interviews I've watched all year. He gives like a lot of great info on the making of the film. He gives anecdotes about how like the sound person on the film was like actually a professional and was like probably working below his pay grade, and how he had never worked a boom mic in his life, but because a lot of people had to wear a lot of hats, he had to just kind of jump in and do that, and just to be kind of face to face with like an actual professional was very intimidating, uncomfortable, you know. He also brings up the New York Times review where they said the reviewer says that this film exudes what they called quote-unquote anti-talent, which is, I guess, a particularly brutal review. Yeah, that one's a really good one. There's a super informative interview with the producer, Michael Kravitz. He does something that I've never really seen before. He pulls out his script book, and what he literally did is he just like highlighted stuff and then gave like an itemized like bill or cost of like what every single thing in the script is going to cost. So like he would highlight something and then like write down the location it would require, write down all the effects it would require, and how much that was going to cost. And that's how he like kind of created a budget for the film. There's an interview with the editor and the assistant editor. This interview is really good, and I think particularly informative for people who are interested in editing, like as an art or as a craft. I think you might want to highlight that one or prioritize that one for sure. There's an interview where the director Charles Kaufman is interviewed by his brother Lloyd Kaufman. It's as you might expect, extremely goofy and silly and entertaining, and like the editing is really fun. It's a good time. There's a locations featurette with the assistant art director Rex Piano and Brandon Hall, who is just like a guy who really likes this movie to the extent that he managed to end up on a special features disc. It's really fun. He's credited as a super fan. He said that he watched the film when he was 10 years old. His mom apparently picked it out at a video store and they watched it together, and then they kept watching it like constantly. Yeah, I don't know about that, but you know, they're doing all the locations in the film, and the film opens with, this is another piece of like interesting cultural commentary and criticism, where like these people are part of this kind of almost like cult, this like capitalist cult, and like they're like doing their pitch to recruit more members at this banquet hall. He says that he found the banquet hall and like confirmed that it was the right one by going inside. He says that he got access to this by lying and saying that he was going to get married when really he was like scouting a location for this weird movie he likes. And he says that at the time that was a lie, but now he really is getting married, and they are considering getting married there, which is neat for them, I guess. There's an archival introduction with the director. It takes place in his bread shop. He owns a bakery now, like a pretty big one, like a pretty successful one. And he says that he would not make this film today, but it was something he did, and he, you know, is proud of it. There is a interview between the director and Darren Bozeman, the guy who did the Saw films and the Mother's Day remake at Comic-Con. It's mostly just Darren discussing the remake and his approach to it, which I thought sounded sound, like it felt like it had good intentions, but apparently the film was quite bad. I haven't seen it. The Eli Roth interview is arguably my favorite special feature on this. I know a lot of people don't like him, and I think his films are questionable, but I like watching him talk about the movies he loves. It's just a really great and really passionate interview. He apparently has discussed the film with Guillermo del Toro, one of my favorite people, and has relayed that Guillermo apparently loves this film, and he agrees that it's like a really super smart commentary on consumerism and American culture. Eli Roth says that he thinks that the film is like deeply, deeply political, which I do agree with. He says that like he was searching for the VHS, like it was just like never in stock for over a year at his local video store before he finally got to see it. And he apparently screened it at his bar mitzvah, has seen it over 50 times, and credits it as something that he has unintentionally ripped off more than once in his own films. Oh, there's a fun little, they call it an archival interview with the assistant art director, Rex Piano. He literally did this just to give himself a commentary credit, because apparently like he is on the audio commentary, but on the original DVD release, like he's not credited. And so he literally shot a special feature to say, by the way, I'm on that commentary, and that's it. And then finally, that commentary I do think is great. I think it's really informative, and I think it's really funny. There's just like a lot of dry humor throughout it. So yeah, like it's super stacked, but you know, hopefully you can derive which ones sound like they are worth watching to you. And I do highly recommend the release. I think it's one of the best of the year. I think the film is great. So that's Mother's Day. Okay, and then finally we have Mark of the Devil. Now this comes in one of these maybe superfluous slipcases that I complain about a lot, but I will perhaps give it a pass just because I like this artwork so much. I think that's fantastic. It's very much my vibe. And then, I don't know, I mean, I think this artwork is good, but I don't know, I might have been happy with just the slipbox art on a slipcover. I'm gonna just call it a day there. I'm becoming very anal about my shelf space. There you have the excellent original poster. Here are your special features. And this is a 3-disc set, 1 4K and 2 Blu-rays. I will say I don't really understand how the information is being distributed on those Blu-rays, because the second disc is not particularly stacked. There's not a lot on it. And the feature-length documentary that is a special feature is on the same Blu-ray as the feature-length film, like as the main feature. So that confused me, but you know, I'm not out here encoding discs, and they would know better than me. Okay, so Mark of the Devil. In terms of the film itself, this is my favorite film of the slate, like easily. This is absolutely like my thing. You know, we have discussed on the channel a few times at this point my special interest in witch hunting films. You can see my original one sheet from Argentina of Witchfinder General right there. Which was a big influence on this film. In fact, it was kind of marketed, or at least created in part, to just kind of capitalize off of the success of that film. But I also have a special interest in torture and execution. The bookcase behind me, there's more than one history book about torture on the shelf, and that may make me sound like a psychopath or something, but I do actually think that it is an exercise in empathy, in trying to understand the extremes of the human experience, and in trying to understand the lengths that human beings will go to harm others. I think it's pretty relevant today. It's not pleasant to learn about. It's not particularly fun, but it is kind of endlessly fascinating to me. And witch-finding films in general I find to be particularly prescient or of the moment, or unfortunately relevant again, as we see so much of that stuff happening to queer people right now, where people will just like assign the most heinous shit without any evidence. And I feel like woke is the new like witch hunting word, where if you assign that, like, you're the bad person that does the bad thing, and like half of the country was now out for blood, you know? And like religious theocracy is like Christian theocracy, let's call it what it is, in this country, in the United States, is like gaining momentum at a rate that is alarming. And so in some ways, watching this stuff is like really scary, because it feels very real and very like predictive, but it's also kind of cathartic and fascinating. This one in particular is it's not about the Salem witch trials. It's not actually clear where it takes place, but it is a European style of witch hunting based off of a lot of real history, although it is kind of inflated, and some of the historical info in there is not particularly accurate. It is based in a lot of real things that happened to people during the Inquisition by the Catholic Church. Now, this was maybe the most frustrating instance I had seen of like not knowing which audio track to watch. It is in German and it is in English, and it is a co-production between Germany and England. So it is like on the Vinegar Syndrome disc, it does say the original German soundtrack, and then I believe that is the first option when you go to watch it. So that's the one I defaulted to, but it's a little bit strange because the title sequences are in English. The original like monologue sequence that is like written on the screen is in English. And then it's clear that most of our principal actors are speaking English. And so it creates that kind of uncomfortable disconnect that I don't like, where it's obvious that it's being dubbed and the actors are not speaking the language that is coming out of their mouths, right? But, you know, this is like a German film is what I understood. And it takes place in Europe and everything. And so I was like, this must be right. But I switched it over, and it was clear that it actually matched with the mouth movements a lot more. But the other thing I noticed was that the actual things they were saying were meaningfully quite different. And this is frustrating to me as like a purist of like wanting the original vision, or like the most accurate representation of like what the film is supposed to be. You know, there's scenes just like within the first 5 minutes where like the English dub says something quite meaningfully different than the German subtitles. Like, we're given different information. Like, it's a different scene almost with that new dialogue. And so I spent so much time researching this and trying to figure out which one was more right before I just watched the whole thing with the quote-unquote wrong audio track. And then what I ended up landing on was the English dub, because even though the performances I thought were worse, it does match with what the actors are saying, and the director is English. And so his original script is in English. Now, the producer, who had beef with the director, was German and wrote a script in German. But from everything I could tell, like, Michael Armstrong was the person with like the vision here, or at least the more accurate vision here. And so my recommendation, to save you the headache that I went through, is to watch this in English, and then maybe watch it again in German to see the differences in the dialogue. But I think it'll be a smoother viewing experience for you. But anyway, this film is pretty fucked up, as you might imagine. It's pretty violent. There's a lot of extended torture sequences here that are fairly realistic. I'm gonna say something really gross real quick. So if that kind of thing bothers you, if you're really particularly squeamish about violence, I'm going to describe something really gross. There's a scene where the lovely young woman on the cover here is being tortured, and they start using the thumb screws on her. And, you know, I'm pretty accustomed to violence in films at this point. I watch a lot of horror films. I watch a lot of out there shit. But this one genuinely, like, got to me and made it grossed me out and, like, made me, like, wince and flinch and, like, think for a second I wish I hadn't seen that. They squeeze her thumb on the thumb screws, which if you don't know what that is, look it up. And her finger, like, pops like a pimple, and, like, the flesh and blood just, like, spurts out. It looks exactly like popping a pimple. It got to me. But yeah, I mean, this isn't exactly a subtle film. Like, the themes are pretty in your face. Religious hypocrisy, oppression at the hands of religion, capitalism as a means of oppression, the state as a means of oppression. I mean, it's just checking all the boxes. It's speaking my language. It's saying a lot of things that I agree with, right? And so it's definitely like an easy win for me. But again, I don't really want to be like preached at things I already agree with. It has to like discuss these things or portray these things in a way that is powerful or special, and I think that this succeeds in that. Like, I think it's a gorgeous film with like a lot of really beautiful on-location cinematography, and I think it's really cool that they actually used the sets and the devices that were actually used in the Inquisition. So you'll have torture dungeons that are the actual torture dungeons used with thumb screws and all sorts of horrible other things that are genuine historical props, which is just really fucking cool. You know, the witchfinders here are just so incredibly stupid and cruel and like nakedly cynical and power hungry, and is the kind of thing that maybe would have seemed ridiculous in a pre-Trump world or something like that. But I think like a kind of populist stupidity and a willful aversion to truth has kind of gained a lot of cultural momentum and capital in a way that is concerning and makes this not seem so far-fetched anymore, you know? So yeah, that's Mark of the Devil. I loved it. I thought it was great. I won't say too much about it, but I also really liked the ending. It goes in ways that you might not expect, and there's a couple of twists and turns in it, and by the end of it, I liked every part of it. I thought it was really effective. Okay, let's kind of go into the special features. So I guess before we get started, I want to say that for the first time in one of these videos, I have a prop to show you all. I have acquired something from the original theatrical release of this film. So throughout these special features, something kept coming up over and over and over again, where they talked about these barf bags that were created as like a marketing stunt by the distributor in the United States, where essentially they sent out hundreds of these to theaters, and they literally would not let you in until you had a branded vomit bag, because, you know, the violence is just so extreme and so gut churning and acid reflux inducing, or whatever you want to call it, that, you know, it's a marketing thing, but also like it is a pretty extreme film. And so they are kind of setting you up with like kind of like a reasonable barometer of like what you can expect in terms of the level of violence, right? But they kept bringing up these vomit bags because it was like this big marketing ploy that like kind of got the film a lot of attention and got the film like a lot of notoriety, and like the distributor was apparently known for this kind of thing. And they had one for every interview that they would hand the subject of the interview to like show them, oh, look at this vomit bag, isn't that neat? And one of the people, I forget who, said like, oh yeah, those vomit bags, I remember those, they were so fun, and like it was such a cool idea. Now those things go for hundreds of dollars on eBay. And I was like, do they really? And I was like, well, I wonder how much it would cost to acquire one. Lo and behold, I have an original Mark of the Devil vomit bag from 1970 in my possession. This was less than $10 with shipping, and it is in basically flawless condition. Like, it doesn't look like it was printed yesterday, of course, but like, you know, there's not really any like noticeable tears. The print has stayed pretty well. But yeah, you have that great poster that was kind of repurposed for the Vinegar Syndrome art. This vomit bag and the price of one admission will enable you to see the first film rated V for violence. There was another marketing thing where they just made up a rating, and apparently the MPAA was not happy about it. Guaranteed to upset your stomach. Positively the most horrifying film ever made. Copyrighted by Hallmark Releasing Corporation, patent pending. See it soon at a theater near you. So yeah, I thought that would be a fun little thing. And just like the actual special features, there is a director's commentary, which I think is good and informative, though it's kind of one of those commentaries that doesn't really tell you too much that you don't already know if you've watched all the interviews. But you know, Director's commentary is always good to have. Now, there is an interview with the director that I really liked. I think it's great. He discusses the original script that he was handed, which was just essentially like a Marquis de Sade, like sexual sadism torture film type thing of like hardcore material, essentially kind of like a more violent porn film. And he was just like, no, if I'm going to do this, I have to change the script basically entirely. And the producers were like, sure, do whatever you want. We just want someone to make this. And so he changed it into like an intelligent, like kind of thoughtful, not to say that porn can't be those things, but like that wasn't what he was interested in. And he made like a still pretty extreme kind of sleazy horror film, but like with a lot of thought behind it and a lot of political messaging. And this created a feud with the producer. I guess it was like a team of producers that were that greenlit this, but like the one producer that was assigned to be on set with him, they just did not like each other because they wanted to make two different films. You know, you think that might produce like a really clunky or messy or disjointed film, but I do think it actually remains fairly cohesive, even though in the director's commentary you can see parts where he was like, yeah, I didn't shoot that. Like that's producer guy. That's second unit stuff. Like that's the stuff he went back in and did, you know? He discussed how he kind of initially discovered like just how horrific and barbaric the torture methods of the Inquisition were. I think he had felt that they were like, that the rumors were greatly exaggerated or whatever. And then he started reading history books and was like, holy shit, this shit really happened. And he like felt an obligation to tell people that like these things actually happened. And that was kind of his impetus or his call to action, I guess, to make the film. The original script actually had the Witchfinder be a closeted homosexual that has a scene actually like fondling the genitals of Christ on like a big crucifix. But I guess that was one too many for the actor. I would have loved to see that. I think we need that cut, or maybe someone can remake it and have that, right? Wouldn't that be fun? He also discussed how like the producer had gone and told like a bunch of straight up lies about him, and that like it's his principle that he doesn't want to like fight with people in public. Like that's just not what he's interested in. Like he doesn't believe in bad mouthing people while they're alive. So he mostly held his tongue, but Udo Kier, who plays the like apprentice Witchfinder, was at the time a closeted gay man, and he's been open for a long time, but I guess at the time he was keeping it fairly under wraps, and the producer had basically accused the director of outing him, and he was just like horribly offended by that because he's like, I would never do something like that. Like I really respected him and I really respect the community, and like I would never out somebody against their will. He also discusses his philosophy on not sanitizing violence, which is something that I have spoken about many times and I believe in, which is like, you know, people will say that this kind of gratuitous violence is like, again, they'll use the word gratuitous as like a negative, or like they'll say that it's unacceptable or shouldn't be shown or shouldn't be made. But like, I think it's important to reckon with the actual consequences of that level of violence and what that actually does to a human being, as opposed to like this kind of action movie PG-13 sanitized violence where you're still having horrific stuff being done to people, but you don't really sit with the consequences of that. Again, I'm not saying we should ban that, or like that shouldn't exist, or I just think we should be more critical about the media that we consume, and maybe not beat up on horror films so much, or like films with extreme violence, when like the thing that is being most mass produced and mass consumed is like just as violent and not being honest about it. There's an interview with the actor Udo Kier, who just kind of seems to believe that the film only existed to shock and give thrills, and he thinks that it succeeded. I mean, he's clearly wrong, but you know, there's that. There's they call it a brief guide to the screenplays of Michael Armstrong with film historian Dr. Adrian Smith. It's weird, he doesn't actually discuss the Mark of the Devil screenplay at all, but what he does do is he kind of has a stack of his collected screenplays that were, I guess, recently printed for the first time, and he does a really good and interesting overview of all those screenplays, including ones that were never made into films. They included like political satires, children's films, and sex comedies. Like, he kind of just did everything and just was a very accomplished and skilled writer. There's a locations featurette that I'm not a huge fan of. Like, there's no narration at all. It's just kind of like scenes from the film and then a shot of the location. But it's really long, and it just kind of has the theme playing over and over again, which, by the way, the music in this rules. Like, the soundtrack is on Spotify. I recommend you listen to it. It's great. And then there's another, like, this one isn't quite as long as the Flemish horror one. This one's about 50 minutes, so technically feature length, but it's a decent documentary called Mark of the Times. It's from 2014, and it's about the new wave of British horror filmmakers from the 60s and 70s. It's really great. It kind of discusses like The Wicker Man, Witchfinder General, Mark of the Devil, these kind of films that were kind of marking a shift from like films that were clearly set on like studio lots and were less explicit and more like ornate, like the Hammer horror stuff, and like kind of transitioning to on location, more explicitly violent and sexual, lower budget films, and this like new wave of horror in Britain. There's an interview with Michael Gingold on Hallmark Releasing. He kind of goes into, again, like the sort of sleazier marketing tactics and like the kind of the gimmicks that they would pull a lot of the time. Like they were pretty shameless and doing whatever they had to do to get butts in seats. They would just like flagrantly rename things to be sequels to films that don't have a sequel, like without the input of the directors. They would exploit like real life tragedies a lot. Just some pretty questionable stuff, but also fairly influential in terms of like pushing the envelope to market extreme films. There's a 2013 Q&A with the director. The sound and his accent make it such that I couldn't understand a word of it. And unfortunately it's not subtitled, so there's that one. There's an archival interview with the actor Herbert. His name can't be Fuchs, right? F-U-X? Fuchs? I don't know. It's really great, though. He seemed to really grasp and understand the themes of the film really well. Does a good job articulating them. There's an archival interview with actress Gabby Fuchs. Again, these are back-to-back. And her last name is F-U-C-H-S. And his last name is F-U-X. It's like the same name spelled differently back to back. I thought that was funny, but it's good. And then there's an archival interview with the composer Michael Holm, who again produced this excellent score that I love. He talks about how it took him 2 hours to convince the violinist to create like the ugly, harsh sound that he actually needed for the Witchfinder theme. Like the guy just kept wanting to play like correctly and like beautifully, but he had to kind of explain like the themes of the film and like what we're trying to accomplish with these sounds, and like after 2 hours the guy finally got it. So that's Mark of the Devil. Again, probably one of the best releases of the year. The film itself gets an 8 out of 10 from me, and I highly recommend the release. Overall, this was a really ambitious, really great slate of films. Really time consuming for me to get through all of it, but I hope that this was illuminating or informative or entertaining for you. Yeah, liking the video helps me out a lot. Commenting, lovely comments for me to read. I really love interacting with you all so that this isn't just me talking at you for an hour. And subscribing to the channel and sharing it with someone weird would really go a long way in supporting this channel non-monetarily. But if you would like to support it monetarily, there are links in the description for my Patreon, channel membership, program, and Amazon wishlist. There's also links in the description for my social media, should you like to be a little bit more intimate. And remember that Satan loves all of their children. Bye. I'd like to take a moment to thank our accomplices: Anthony Listro, The Boogeyman's Closet, Carlin Cook, Deanna Vave, The Disconnected, Dustin Putman, George Strang, Julie Humphries, Nosferatu 1334, Peppa Crab, and Sasha Bobashasaurus. If you'd like to be counted amongst their ranks, the link is in the description.